Greetings from New York City and Columbia Business School Executive Education. I'm Scott Gardner, and I'm here today with Professor Adam Galinsky for the How to Be an Inspiring Leader webinar. Before I introduce Adam, I'd like to go over a few quick logistics for the webinar. An email will be sent to you with a recording of this webinar. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, please do so at #CBSExecEd. And as always, we encourage you to upload your questions throughout the webinar into the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as possible at the end. Adam, it's great to be with you today. He is the chair of the Management Division and the Vikram S. Pandit Professor of Business at the Columbia Business School. He co-authored the critically acclaimed best-selling book, Friend and Foe, and his popular TED Talk, How to Speak Up for Yourself, has over 5.5 million views. Furthermore, Poets and Quants selected him as one of the world's 50 best business school professors. Adam, great to be with you today. I'll leave it to you, and I'll rejoin you for Q&A.
Great. Thank you. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here today to talk to you a little bit about a model that I've created about how to be an inspiring leader. And this model started about 15 years ago, where I asked a group of individuals a very simple question. I asked them to think about a leader from their own experiences that inspired them. I said, think about a leader that inspired you. And I asked them to write down not just who that leader was, but what was it about that leader, about the way they were, the way they acted, or what they said that really made them inspiring to that person. Now, over time, I started to ask a second question, which was, tell me about another leader that also changed you inside, but this time infuriated you, made you feel so angry. And I asked them to write down, what was about this leader that infuriated you, what they said, or how they acted, or how they were in the world. And in asking these questions over the last 15 years, I've asked thousands and thousands of individuals all across the world, from Australia to China to Thailand to Israel to Germany to Argentina to Canada to the United States. And there's three main conclusions that have come from all of these different examples. I've sort of analyzed them to understand them. The first is that the core dimensions of what it means to be an inspiring versus an infuriating leader are universal. They make up a universal tapestry that exists across every culture in the world. Two, the inspiring leader and the infuriating leader are really mirror images of each other. Once you know one, you know the other. Third, all of the examples that are received all over the world, the tens of thousands of examples, can be reduced to three simple dimensions. An inspiring leader is visionary, they are an exemplar of desired behavior, and they are a great mentor. And I'm going to give you a little mnemonic device to help you remember this. I call this the Venn diagram of inspiring leadership. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through each one of these dimensions and break them down for you. The first dimension of being an inspiring leader is to be visionary. What does that mean? Well, partially it means seeing the big picture, rising above the trees, getting out of the weeds to see what really matters. And then it's infusing that big picture with an optimistic, meaningful vision of the future. So being visionary is an optimistic, meaningful, big picture vision of the future. Now, meaning is a really important point there. And to understand the importance of meaning, I want those out there to think about who have kids, how their life changed when they have kids. And the research is very clear that when you have kids, on every dimension of life satisfaction, your life gets worse. You sleep less well, you eat less well, you have sex less often, and yet our species hasn't died off. And the reason why our species hasn't died off is because we are biologically conditioned to find meaning in our kids. That means that as humans, because our kids provide us this meaning and purpose, that is what we are driven by. We are driven to find meaning in the world and to be motivated by that. And I love this quote from Nietzsche that really captures this idea of the importance of meaning and purpose. People who have a why to live can bear almost any how. You can suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune if you know why you're doing something. So we have this optimistic, meaningful, big picture vision of the future. And then the next step is you've got to reduce that down to its essence, to its simplest form. I call this the Inception rule after the movie Inception. And there's a great quote when trying to, how do we plant an idea in someone's mind, and says, you need the simplest version of the idea. The one will grow naturally in your subject's mind. So you gotta keep it simple. So now once you have this simple, optimistic, meaningful, big picture vision of the future, you gotta share it. And this is really important, because what happens to a group when they don't have a shared vision? Well, some people go randomly in different directions, so work becomes confusing. Sometimes people go in opposite directions, so they can't coordinate. Sometimes they go against each other and conflict flares. Or sometimes people just stop moving and they disengage. I'm going to show you a simple experiment from the 1970s that really captures how important this is. I'm going to show you this little paragraph, and I've asked people around the world what's going on here. And only about 5% of people, CEOs, executives, everyone from around the world can solve this. And I'm going to read to you this and see if you can solve it. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that's the next step. It's important not to overdo things because a mistake can be really expensive. After the procedure is completed, you arrange the materials in different groups again. They can be put into their appropriate places. Now, there was another condition in this experiment. They got the exact same passage, but they got a title. And I want you to think about what your experience is like when you get this title. Doing the laundry, right? When you get this title, all of a sudden every sentence takes on meaning. Every sentence coordinates with other sentences. Everyone has the same shared vision. Now, this experiment isn't very interesting to know that it was easier to read when you had a title than when you didn't. What's interesting was it happened later. Everyone in this experiment was given a memory test. Now, the people who got the title didn't remember everything word for word, but they got the gist, and they understood it pretty well. Now, the people who didn't get the title could remember very little, and some of them couldn't even remember having read anything. They couldn't even process it. So what does sharing your vision do? It helps people make sense of their work, helps them engage with their work, helps them remember their work. And then the final thing is really this idea of repetition. Repeating the same image or phrase that personifies your vision. So being visionary is having optimistic, meaningful, big picture vision of the future reduced to its simplest form and repeated and shared. And I think that the one speech that really exemplifies this is Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, right? He had an optimistic, big picture vision of the future, right? That his children one day judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And then he repeated that central idea of this dream over and over again. Now, the second factor of being an inspiring leader is being an exemplar of desired behavior. And I have some pictures here of leaders that vary by gender and race and age and generation and country. But there's something that is similar across all of these photographs. Where's the leader? They're out in front. They're taking on the most risk. Let's take George Washington, for example. Where's his boat? It's out in front. Where's he in that boat? He's in the front of the boat. What's he doing? He's standing up in that boat. He's taking on the most risk. He is a courageous protector. So being an exemplar of desired behavior is about this courageous protection of other individuals. But notice they all seem calm. I call this the eye of the hurricane. They're calm amidst a chaos and crisis. So, an exemplar of desired behavior is a calm and courageous protector. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have energy, because it turns out that inspiring leaders also have authentic passion. I've studied people talking about their passion versus not talking about their passion and tried to understand what are the behavioral elements that distinguish someone talking about their passion versus not talking about the passion. And there are lots of different things. Their eyes light up. They have big beaming smiles. They have jazz hands that go everywhere. They talk a little faster, a little higher pitch, and they lean in as if telling you a secret. So when you are moved by your own passion, we can see this. We can see it in your eyes, in your mouth, in your voice, in your hands, and in your body. And there's a couple things that I want to point out about these studies that I've done and analysis I've done. The first, passion is really hard to fake. right? 5 different things are happening with your body at once. If you tried to fake it, you'd have to say, okay, get my eyes bright up. I got to smile. It's impossible to fake. The second thing is that when you are truly invigorated by your passion, you pass it on to the person you're talking to. Their eyes light up. They smile. They lean in. And so if you want to inspire others, you yourself have to be inspired. And I want to tell you a quote from about Carla Harris, who is Vice Chair of Wealth Management at Morgan Stanley and has led some of the biggest IPOs in the world. And she first started going on these IPO roadshows. She wasn't very effective. And she says, my presentations were criticized because of emulating the styles of my colleagues. Each of those styles worked for them, but I had to find my own style, the one that worked for me. I couldn't resonate with others until I resonated with myself. So you got to find your own style that's going to be inspiring to other people. The final part of being an exemplar of desired behavior is being consistent. And there's a great quote from the PepsiCo CEO who's stepping down. I wouldn't ask anybody to do something I wouldn't do myself. So you got to exemplify your vision. Don't be a hypocrite. Hypocrites are the most infuriating of them all. Say what you mean and do what you say. The final factor, or exemplar desired behavior, is a courageous and calm protector. Authentically passionate, creative, and consistent. The final dimension of being an inspiring leader is being a great mentor. And to understand this, I need to give you a physics problem. Now, what happens when you put force and pressure on an object? What direction does it go in? Well, here's Glenn Hubbard, the dean at CBS. He puts force and pressure on this object, and it goes away from him. But leadership isn't a physics problem. It's a person problem. So I'm going to change one word in this sentence. What happens when you put force and pressure on a person? What direction does he or she go in? Well, Glenn Hubbard puts too much force and pressure on me, and I push back. And so if you don't remember anything else from this webinar, I want you to remember these 3 simple words. People aren't objects. People are objects. Leadership would be a physics problem. But people aren't objects. Leadership is a people problem. And what we need to do is, rather than using force and pressure, we need to use respect. We need to respect other people. We need to empower and develop other people. Well, how do we do that? What does it mean to empower and develop people? Well, there are a couple elements to it. One is about involving other people and giving them opportunities and letting them fail and coaching them and not micromanaging. Here's a great quote from Confucius that really captures this. He says, tell me and I will forget. Show me and I may remember. But it's only when you involve me will I truly understand. Now, another element of empowering, developing people is encouraging people. And I have a quote from Jim Valvano, who's a former coach in basketball that won one of the most surprising national championships in the history of basketball. And afterwards, he talked about the encouragement he got from his father. And he said this, the gift my father gave me. I think it's the strongest and most powerful gift I ever received. The gift my father gave me every day of my life. He believed in me. He believed in me when I failed. He'd look me in the eye and say, you're going to make it. I know you are. So encouraging people is a foundational element of being inspiring. Finding the potential in others that they might not see in themselves. The final element of being a great mentor is being a great perspective taker. And I wrote a paper called Why Every Great Leader Needs to Be a Great Perspective Taker. Perspective taking is really simple. It's simply understanding how another person is looking at the world, understanding their vantage point. It's simple, but it's hard. And one thing that makes it particularly hard is that when we have power, our perspective taking ability goes down. Now, to get power, you need to be a great perspective taker. But once we're in power, when Homer Simpson gives his wife Marge her birthday present, it's a bowling ball. Because Homer likes to go bowling. It's also got his name on the bowling ball. So clearly thinking that she would want the same thing that he wants. Now, there's one other really important element of power and perspective taking. And that's understanding how your power affects other people. I actually coined a phrase for this called the power amplification effect. When we have power, all of our gestures, good and bad, small and big, get amplified. Now, sometimes this is as simple as our criticism gets louder when it's given by someone in power. But our praise and our gratitude also speak greater volumes when we have power. And to really understand the power amplification effect, I want you to think of receiving a 6-word text from your boss that simply says, "I need to talk to you." How would that make you feel? Now, for many of us, it would make us feel very afraid, and we'll feel frightened, and it's portentous. We don't really know what it is. Now, I came face to face with this many years ago when I was an assistant professor at the Kellogg School of Management. And being an assistant professor is really interesting because you're the ultimate middle power person. You have more power than the doctoral students who depend on you for resources and letters of rec, but you have less power than the tenured professors that will one day vote on your promotion. Anyway, one day the elevator doors opened up and I see Gail Berger, a doctoral student. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I say, "Gail, come by my office. I need to talk to you." And I knew something was up 3 hours later. I said, "Come by my office. I need to talk to you at 3 p.m. When she kind of walked in and she was really tentative. And actually what I had to share with her was a really good thing. It was an idea for a conference. And when I told her that, I still remember what Gail Berger did that day. She slammed her fist on the table and said, "Never do that to me again." I was like, "Do what?" She said, "Never say you need to see me without telling me why." Do you know how much work I got done in the last 6 hours? 0. Is Adam mad at me? Is someone else mad at me? Am I going to lose resources? Now, at first I thought, Gail's neurotic. Turns out Gail is a little neurotic. But the very next day, the chair of my department, the most powerful person in my department as a faculty member, wrote me an email and said, "Adam, can you come by my office? I need to talk to you." And I thought a lot about what Gail said, and I thought a lot about what I said to her. "Gail, I need to talk to you. Come by my office at 3 p.m. Notice that's 13 words. I could have actually just used this 13 words also and said, "Hey, Gail, I have a great conference idea. Come by my office at 3 p.m. So we have to understand, take the perspective of others, how our power affects other people. So the power amplification effect. All of our gestures, good and bad, small and big, get amplified when we have power, and therefore we have to know how our power affects others. So the third dimension of being an inspiring leader is to be a great mentor. You've got to empower and develop others, take their perspective, and know how your behavior affects others. So what I've tried to do today is give you these 3 core dimensions of being an inspiring leader. The first is visionary, having an optimistic and meaningful, big picture vision of the future that's reduced to its simplest form and repeated and shared. So being an exemplar of desired behavior, being a calm and courageous protector, authentically passionate, creative, and consistent. And finally, it's about being a great mentor, about empowering people and developing others, and being generous, and also being self-aware how your behavior affects others. So this is really simple. It's even simpler when I give you this mnemonic device, the Venn diagram of inspiring leadership. But it's also really hard. And I'm going to talk a little bit more with Scott about how hard it is in a second, because I've already received a lot of your questions, asking questions about this. But I want to tell you one thing that all of you can do going forward, something that I do myself once a month. I ask myself a couple of simple questions. Am I being visionary? Am I thinking big picture? Am I infusing meaning? Have I reduced something to its simplest form? Am I appropriately repeating and sharing it? Am I being an exemplar of desired behavior? Am I being calm and courageous when I need to be, right? Am I being authentically passionate? Am I being a great mentor? Am I micromanaging, or am I empowering people? Am I encouraging them and developing them? Am I aware of how my behavior is affecting other people? And if you do this once a month or every few weeks, and ask yourself those 3 simple questions and really reflect on your own behavior, your days and the days of others will be mostly joyful. Thank you.
Adam, thanks so much.
Sure.
Great information.
Yes.
We've got some great questions coming in, so
Yes.
let's get right to those, okay?
Yeah.
This one I saw a lot of, and you'd mentioned it was
Yeah.
coming in a lot. We saw it coming in, and I think this is going to resonate with a lot of you. We've been getting that how one can continue to stay inspired when times are challenging or even in times of failure.
Right, and so, I mean, literally, we were looking at the questions before that had come in pre, and there was how do you remain inspired when times are challenging? And there's lots of things that knock us off the inspiring path. The first is just pressure, time pressure, work pressure, pressure from above, right? High stakes pressure, crisis pressure, right? There's biological needs. When I'm hungry, I might get angry, or when I'm fatigued, I pay less attention to others. Or when I'm really mad at someone outside of work, it might affect the way that I treat them. Or when I'm mad at someone at work, and it affects how I treat people at home. Or when I'm in new environments, I feel a little uncertain. And so those are all challenging situations that all knock us off the inspiring path and lead us towards the infuriating path. So how do we handle that? How do we deal with that? And there are a couple things that I think are really important. The first is what I call self-discipline or self-care. If you are someone who knows that I am an infuriating demon when I get 6 hours of sleep or less, then you ensure you don't get 6 hours of sleep or less, right? Or if you're someone who gets angry when you're hungry, you always have a granola bar with you or something to keep you that, right? One of the most important things that we can do in any situation when we're feeling overwhelmed is to take a step back. Sometimes it's literally physically taking that step back. Sometimes it's just psychologically getting out of that situation, but allows us to see the broader picture of what we're looking at. Another thing that research shows that's really important is this idea of understanding your own values and committing to those values and practicing those values on a daily basis. That allows you to overcome them. Now, sometimes we can reduce those forces, right? Get enough sleep. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have an infuriating mentor above us. And so it's about that idea of self-discipline and self-care, taking a step back, right? Identifying what you're experiencing, committing to those values and practicing them on a daily basis.
That's great. And I think this leads us into a lot of questions that have come in. The first one came in is, how can you be a leader in mid-management when upper management does not provide the leadership of support?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was just saying. What happens when you have that infuriating mentor above you? And there's a couple things about that. The first thing is, what's the one thing that you can control in the world? You can control your own behavior. So even when people above you are not displaying inspiring leadership, that doesn't mean that you still can't. You can rise above that, committing to that, understanding the Venn diagram of inspiring leadership. And even when people above you are treating bad, you can still be that calm and courageous protector for the people below you. You can do that. And one of the things that I think is true is that if you really exemplify the inspiring leadership dimensions, those will be contagious. Both not only down, but also up. People will see the way you're acting and will be affected by that and will start to model your behavior.
That's great. Kenneth from Chile, he wrote on this theme here, what is the most accurate way to encourage people without getting them uncomfortable?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What's one of the ways that you can encourage people without making them uncomfortable? Well, there's a couple things that you can do that involves encouragement. And one is optimism. That you believe in them, that you believe that this situation is difficult and they may not handle it perfectly, but you believe that they're going to handle it long-term better, they're going to get experience and do that, and being there for support. I have a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old, and one of the things that they teach us is that it's important for kids to experience some disappointment and help them work through that, for example. And so part of that is, we all have the tendency to want to protect people and to micromanage, sometimes for control, but sometimes to be that great protector. But sometimes we have to let people fall down and skin their knee, but we can help pick them back up and help them understand why they fell and help them understand how they're less likely to fall in the future. We don't want to be helicopter leaders or lawnmower leaders that take away every obstacle from the people in front of us. We want to give them the skills that help them deal with those obstacles themselves. That's what true leadership is, that people can handle difficult situations even when you're not present.
Right. And for the people out there who really want to be visionary leaders, who want to have these qualities, Someone's asking, some people are naturally more visionary or passionate than others. So would you say that these traits can really, truly be learned and inherent for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest biases that exist out there is that somehow extroverted people are better leaders because they have certain these outward characteristics that make them potentially more inspiring. And the data are very clear on that on two things. First, people's intuition is right, but only in the short term. It is true that in very short term, extroverted people emerge as leaders more than introverted people. But over the course of time, that's no longer true. And studies that looked at, for example, attorneys who are really successful in winning cases, and they looked at some of their closing statements, for example. And what they were shocked by is the wide range of ways that people approach those statements. Some were loud and boisterous, thunderous, in their convictions. Some were soft-spoken. Others were very meticulous and laying out an argument step by step. And what seemed to really matter was not how boisterous or how loud or demonstrative you were. It's that what was the style that worked for that person? What was authentic for that person? And I discovered this when I was a young assistant professor. I was actually given a teaching mentor who won all these awards. And I thought that I had to just copy his behavior. And he would stand like this, and he was very pontificating. And so the first time I taught, I thought I had to do this. And it didn't go very well. And eventually I learned my own style. And that's what you have to do is, what's the style that works for you?
Right, and that's definitely not your style.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly. So this is a good question because it relates to what leaders are maybe dealing with, and you touched upon it in the webinar. Panos asks, how do you see inspiring leadership in the digital age? Is it anything different or new that someone should consider?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I'll be completely honest, I haven't studied that in particular and looked through that in a very clear sense. But I will say that many different phenomenon that exist outside the digital stage also exist within the digital stage. Now, there's some things that make digital a little bit more difficult to process. For example, sarcasm is one thing that's really hard to process on Twitter, for example. But that's also really important as a leader to also recognize that sarcasm is hard for many people to process. And if we go back to the power amplification effect, sarcasm may sting a lot more than you think it does when you have power. So I think even in a case like that, where sarcasm is more difficult on Twitter, even leaders have to be careful with using sarcasm unless they're very careful on how they use it, convey well-intentioned, trusting meaning behind that sarcasm, for example.
We have about 2 minutes left,
Sure.
so I have a good question. I'm a female in finance mid-management. Recognizing that it's impossible to have 100% of the answers 100% of the time, how can I be an inspiring leader to those I manage at those times that I don't have the answers without undermining others' confidence in my ability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that people really like is honesty from individuals. I used the word consistent before. I said, don't be a hypocrite. And sometimes when people don't have all the answers, it's actually kind of very inspiring. It acknowledges that they are learning just like everyone else is, that they're not perfect. I interviewed the CEO of Endeavor once, and I'm blanking on her name right now, but I'll try to remember in a second. But she talked about how she didn't really become an inspiring leader until she actually became less super and more human. Linda Rottenberg is her name. And it was when she exposed some of her vulnerability. And there's research that shows that super competent people are actually not like that much, that we like a little vulnerability in people. There's a reason why every single president of the United States until 2016 in the 20th century had a dog, right? Because it humanizes that person. It makes them a little bit less super and a little bit more human. Now, Donald Trump's the first one to never not get a dog, but every other president has recognized the importance of showing some vulnerability, knowing when to shed a tear, for example, or when to open up their heart.
Well, I think this is, very good information, and I think the people who are leading well nowadays will follow these ideas that you have. And is there any final thoughts you have before we end?
The final thing I'll say is just remember, reflection really makes a difference. To reflect once a month on your own behavior and asking yourself those three questions. Am I being visionary? Am I being an exemplar of desired behavior? am I being a great mentor?
Right. Thank you, Adam.
Sure.
It's great to work
Thanks
with you
so much.
today. And please join us for The Conversation Continues. Again, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.